College football may still be a month and a half away, but with the MLB All-Star break here, we are well into talking season. I don't know about y'all. I'm ready to start digging deep into this college football preparation. Today, we're going to look at the Big Ten quarterbacks. I'm going to rank them on a tier list. We did this last week with the ACC. If you watch that video, there's going to be 6 tiers, as you know. We have Heisman, guys who I think have a good chance of ending up in New York this December. Then we have very good, which is just a tier below that. We got above average, average, liability, and then unknown. If you didn't know, my name is Michael Fordham. Follow me on Twitter at Fordham Betting, handicap baseball, college basketball, but my main sport is college football. Last year in the 2021 season, hit at a 55% clip and netted over 27 units. I'm going to have tons of sports betting content throughout the season. I'll do a deep dive into every conference. We'll do season win totals. We'll do conference championship futures, and then obviously into the season, we'll certainly break down some games. I appreciate all y'all watching. Please subscribe to the channel. That would mean a lot. If you like what you see, like the video. And I'll say one other thing before we get started. There is some nuance to some of these tier rankings. I'm basing these off past numbers, just kind of my feel on all these quarterbacks, as well as how I see them fitting with what they're asked to do in their current system. So appreciate y'all watching. Let's get right into the video. All right, guys, we're going to start here with Rutgers. We got 2 quarterbacks in contention for this job. Saw a lot of Noah Vedral last year. Got to put him in the liability category. Actually got off to a pretty good start at the beginning of last season, but as expected, as he started to play some of those, tougher Big Ten defenses, did not show the downfield passing that would make me feel good about him going into this year. Throughout his career, 17 touchdowns to 15 interceptions. Don't love that ratio. Did complete just over 60% of his passes, but 6.2 yards per attempt. That's just not very effective downfield. So I do think Vedral is a liability. I mean, he's mobile enough with his feet. I just don't think that he's going to show much improvement this year in this offense. Still only year 3 under Greg Schiano. Don't think this is the type of guy that's going to lead from the front and kind of pull that team up. The other guy in contention, Gavin Wismatt, high-rated 4-star recruit. Issue is only has 21 career attempts. He is an unknown. Definitely probably has more upside than a guy like Noah Vedral. The issue is I don't know if he's got as high of a floor as Vedral. Wismatt has that ability, but got to put him in the unknown just too early in his career. All right, we got another quarterback battle competition. Two tough guys here from Iowa, Spencer Petras and Alex Padilla. Got to put both these guys in the liability category as well. Spencer Petras has definitely played more over the last 2 years, but I mean, numbers are just gross. 6.5 yards per attempt. Granted, Kirk Ferentz and Iowa have never really had great quarterback play. They win with their defense. They force a lot of turnovers, and they do a lot of little things right. Special teams, they've always been great in that area. So, it's not going to be really anything new. Petras, to this point in his career, is certainly kind of taken away from what they're trying to do. They're obviously a run-first team, but when he has been called on to throw and when they do fall behind, certainly not the guy that you're going to want leading that offense. On the other hand, though, Alex Padilla, less than 50% completion a year ago, less than 6 yards per attempt. He's not a better option. He's probably more inconsistent. I mean, the one advantage that Petras does have, he's played more. He's played in a lot of big games and a lot of close games. So, I do think Petras wins that job. At the end of the day, neither one of these guys are good options. I don't necessarily think that's an indictment on Iowa. They've obviously got a very, you can call it old school or just outdated offensive, mindset or system. But at the end of the day, I mean, they've always kind of had that. They win with their defense and they win with their special teams, do a lot of the little things right. There's certainly a reason why Kirk Ferentz is the longest tenured head coach in college football. So, I'm not saying Iowa has a bad year. In fact, I don't think they do. But at the end of the day, from a quarterback standpoint, think both of their, true options going into the season have to put them in the liability category. All right, third team in the video, and we've already got our third quarterback battle here. With Michigan, we got Cade McNamara versus J.J. McCarthy. Start with McNamara, who was obviously their full-time starter last year. I think he's an above-average quarterback. He's going to have a potentially elite running back sharing the backfield with him and Blake Corum. We saw them pound that ground game with Hassan Haskins last year. Don't think that's going to change much. Corum is the higher upside running back. And saw him have a really effective freshman year. McNamara doesn't have to be a superhero for Michigan to contend for a Big Ten championship this year. He's got to take care of the football, and he's got to be efficient enough. I saw that last year. 64% completion. Jim Harbaugh can win with that. 8 yards per attempt, that's good enough. And like I said, 15 touchdowns to just 4 interceptions. He takes care of the football. He is the safe option with how good Michigan's run game projects to be. If you're Jim Harbaugh, you really just don't want your quarterback to be a liability. I understand J.J. McCarthy is the 5-star guy. He's got a better arm than McNamara, and he's probably going to develop into a better player. But the issue is you have to put him in the unknown because you don't know if he can take care of the football over the course of the season. Michigan's got a tough schedule. They're going to play a lot of good defenses. It's not a lock just because he might be the more high upside player that he's the better option. Did see him be effective a year ago in a small role, very mobile, can use his legs. I'm not taking away anything from his arm, but, if you're asking me my opinion on, who I should go with, I think McNamara is the safe option. I mean, it's pretty tough to lead a team to the college football playoff. You beat Ohio State, you win the Big Ten championship, and then to immediately face a quarterback battle. I thought Cade McNamara did a great job in his role. I really don't see the need to change anything up. For the purposes of this video, I do think Cade McNamara is an above average quarterback. Do think J.J. McCarthy might have the higher ceiling. Don't think he has the higher floor. Just hasn't played enough over the course of a full season in high leverage situations. Got to put him in that unknown category. We'll get more into some of these quarterback battles, in my opinion. But, if you're asking me, I think McNamara has to be the option going into the season. All right, moving on to a pretty well-known name here. Might say that's because of his brother, Taulia Tagovailoa at Maryland. I think he's the third best quarterback in this conference. I would qualify him as very good. Saw him a year ago, complete almost 70% of his passes, 68.5% to be exact. 8 yards per attempt. Do think that upticks this year. Mike Locksley, this is year 4 under Mike Locksley. He's recruited very well, especially at the wide receiver position. So some of those early recruiting classes for Mike Locksley are starting to become the veteran guys on this team. I saw major strides from Maryland a year ago. They had 2 guys last year in the running back room at or over 5 yards per carry. You got a good passing game. I mean, Tagovailoa averaged 300 yards per game through the air. This could be a very good offense this year. I think all of those receivers, as they gain experience, are going to start to live up to the bill. One knock on Tagovailoa, if you just look at his overall numbers, did have 11 interceptions last year versus 24 touchdowns. 5 of those interceptions came in that one game against Iowa on that Friday night early in the season. Just 6 other interceptions across Maryland's other 12 games. Do think that is a bit misleading. I had a large bet on Iowa in that game, so that's the only reason I remember that. But I do think there's some context needed. Tagovailoa is not going to really be asked to do all that much in the run game, but he's certainly mobile enough to evade the rush. I really like Taulia Tagovailoa. I think we see him creep above 70% this year. It's off that upward trend over the past 2 seasons. If he can inch closer to 8.5, 9 yards per attempt, and just continue to take care of the football, I think he's going to be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten this season. I'm going to have him third, as you'll see in a second. I think Tagovailoa is going to have a really, really good year for Maryland. And I think this offense will just, in general, be very effective. All right, Ryan Hilinski from Northwestern. Definitely got to rate him a liability. I mean, don't think probably. He is definitely the worst returning quarterback in the Big Ten. Over the course of his career at both South Carolina and then last year at Northwestern, 57% completion, under 6 yards per attempt. I mean, 14 touchdowns to 9 interceptions. I mean, it's not like he's a turnover machine. With some of the other areas Northwestern struggles with, this is not really the guy that's going to lead them back after a really disappointing 3-9 year. I do expect Pat Fitzgerald to just pound the ground game this year. But with that being said, I mean, Northwestern's probably going to fall behind in some of these games. Don't think Hilinski's the guy that you want slinging the rock around through the air. Those numbers kind of speak for themselves. I would expect eventually that Fitzgerald's going to move to one of his 2 younger quarterback options. You got Carl Richardson, got Brendan Sullivan. Both those guys have got to be better options than Hilinski. Think he'll probably play his way out of this starting quarterback job at some point, maybe even week 0 when they play Nebraska in Dublin. So it'll be interesting to see. This one's pretty cut and dry for me. I think Ryan Hilinski is far and away the worst quarterback in the Big Ten this year, and probably won't even see much of him because he'll probably play his way out of the job. Casey Thompson at Nebraska. I kind of went back and forth on this, and I'll say this: I am a Texas fan, so I saw Casey Thompson up close and personal last year. I'm going to rate him above average. I do think he is below McNamara. The issue with Casey Thompson, his highs were really high last year. We put up 70 against Texas Tech. He played great against Oklahoma. He had his moments. The issue is he had some head-scratching performances. I mean, go look at his stat line against TCU, against Iowa State, against West Virginia. All three of those happen to be on the road. I do worry a little bit about his consistency. Overall, though, did have good numbers. 63% completion, over 8 yards per attempt, 24 touchdowns, just 9 interceptions. But for a guy that doesn't have a great arm, he's a little bit too volatile for my liking. I certainly wasn't, sad to see him go or anything like that. With that being said, Nebraska should have a good defense this year. I mean, they got one of the best linebacking cores in the nation. Should be able to hold some teams to some pretty low numbers. I don't think Casey Thompson's going to be asked to do anything out of his element. He just doesn't have a lot of arm strength down the field, but he's certainly effective in that short to intermediate passing game. I've seen people say, "Oh, he's the perfect fit for Nebraska." I mean, he's nothing more than an above average quarterback in my mind. I think he's probably closer to average than he is very good. That's pretty clear to me after watching him for a year. I'm not saying it was a bad acquisition by Scott Frost, but at the end of the day, I mean, you're coming off a guy like Adrian Martinez, who one of the knocks on him was just some of those turnovers, some of that inconsistency. I don't know how much you gain by adding Casey Thompson. Don't think he's a world beater. At the end of the day, though, has had his moments at a pretty high level. Say net, that comes out to an above average rating, but do think he is below a very consistent guy like Cade McNamara. And I do struggle. I do worry a little bit as to how he's going to, fare in some of those tough Big Ten road environments. All right, Payton Thorne from Michigan State. I think he's got the chance to have a very good year. Saw enough from him last year. I'm going to end up putting him atop of this above average category. The one thing that I was not impressed about with him, just a 61% completion. That's a little bit low. That being said, 8.5 yards per attempt, did show some ability striking on some deep balls. He's going to have every chance to add to that this year. He's got one of the best receivers in college football. Jaden Reed had a big year last year. His role's only going to increase this year. The one concern I guess some people might have with Thorne, and I am willing to hear this argument, did have one of, if not the best running backs in college football last year in Kenneth Walker III. What people don't think about in football, a good running back makes everybody better. It makes the quarterback's job easier. So with losing Walker, I do get the argument that, maybe Thorne's numbers got propped up a little bit. But with that being said, I actually like some of the running backs that Mel Tucker added this offseason. Jared Broussard played a lot of football at Colorado and was over 5 yards per carry. Think he'll come in and be effective immediately. And then also added a bruiser in Berger, who played his college football at Wisconsin before. So I actually do, don't have a Kenneth Walker on the roster for sure, but I actually don't mind those two offseason acquisitions by Mel Tucker. I still think the deep ball and the vertical passing game will be open for Thorne. Just given that full year of experience, would expect him to become more consistent through the air. Definitely got to get that completion percentage up. Definitely some big play threat with Thorne. If he can just get a little bit more efficient, could easily see him climbing into this very good category. I think a lot of people think Michigan State was a one-hit wonder. I'm not so sure. I think Thorne will have a very good year, but do need to see just a little bit more. I'll put him atop that above average category to be safe. All right, Sean Clifford at Penn State. This is a guy that seems like he's been in college football for like a decade. At the end of the day, I don't know if this is going to ruffle some feathers or anything. I just don't view Clifford as anything more than an average quarterback. Has started 33 games over the course of his career. That's obviously an added bonus as you start to play some of these high leverage games. But with that said, I just wasn't impressed last year. 62% completion, 7.4 yards per attempt. Did take care of the football, so I'll give him that. But I just didn't. I just don't think he's very talented. It's just that. I think he's gotten a lot out of himself in his college career. But I don't think he's the guy that's taking Penn State to that next level. What doesn't help Clifford, doesn't have a very good run game, and Penn State had one of the worst running games in the Big Ten last year, if not the worst. They didn't really add a lot on their offensive line this offseason to take them to that next step. Lost Jahan Dotson, who was one of the best wide receivers in the country a year ago. I don't envision Sean Clifford having that great of a year. Has shown some regression over the last few years. His best year obviously was in 2019 when they ended up making a New Year's Six bowl. In all honesty, and this is a much more general conversation that we'll have at a later date, but I wouldn't be all that surprised if this is James Franklin's last year at Penn State. just seems like things have kind of hit a wall. I just don't know how much better this team got this offseason. Michigan has certainly passed them up. You could argue that Michigan State has passed them up too. I just think Franklin's kind of fallen behind. It seems like things have kind of run its course. Think that becomes apparent this year. At the end of the day, don't think Clifford is going to lead this team from where they're at. I'm going to say he's an average quarterback. I know that's going to ruffle some feathers for all you guys in Pennsylvania. It is what it is. Sean Clifford's an average quarterback. Don't get deceived by this black and gold jersey here. This is Connor Bazelak from Indiana. Unfortunately, don't have a picture of him in spring practice. He transferred to Indiana after that. I do think he is below Clifford, but, kind of in that same vein, very average quarterback. Did complete 66% of his passes in the SEC over the course of his career, but just 7 yards per attempt. Not all that impressed with that. He's also struggled some with turnovers. 23 touchdowns to 17 interceptions. I definitely think that's why he's lower than Sean Clifford. If you give Clifford one thing, it's that he did take care of the football last year. But, do worry a little bit about that with Bazelak entering a new system at Indiana, who's also a team that, really had a disappointing year last year. Don't think Bazelak's the type of guy that's going to totally carry an offense, probably just to a much greater degree that what I just talked about with Clifford. He just doesn't have a lot around him. Indiana was the biggest disappointment. Certainly in the Big Ten, maybe in the country last year. I'm not saying it was a bad pickup because once Michael Penix went down last year, they just had some terrible quarterback options. So it is an upgrade. I don't mind the acquisition by Tom Allen, but I just don't know how much it's going to matter. I think he's an average quarterback, probably going to have a high completion percentage, but just don't know what that's going to lead to. Just not a very effective downfield thrower. I think Connor Bazelak is probably the definition of an average quarterback. All right, this is an interesting guy here. Tommy DeVito at Illinois, previously played at Syracuse, played actually the most in 2019, 63% completion that year, 7 yards per attempt, 19 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. Did like that little nugget. At the end of the day, though, this is where context is needed. Syracuse just could not protect him that year, and he's not a mobile guy. He had one of the worst offensive lines in college football back in 2019. That certainly didn't help him out. This is a completely different scenario he's entering. Brett Bielema, if you saw Illinois last year, very kind of pro-style team. Quarterback is going to line up under center. They got a really good running back in Chase Brown. Seems to be a theme in the Big Ten. Do think running backs are going to be the theme of this conference this year. I know Brent Bielema hired Barry Looney Jr. to kind of make Illinois more of a tempo team, but at the end of the day, I don't know if they have the Jimmies and Joes to do that at this moment. So I do think at some point this team is going to revert back to who they are, a run-first team, a pro-style type of team. I actually like DeVito in that system. I'm going to put him in the average category. We just haven't seen him a lot over these past few years, but very highly regarded recruit, 4-star recruit in the 2017 or 2018 class. So he's got the ability. I think he's finally in a system that kind of fits who he is. He's certainly not a mobile guy, pro-style quarterback. I actually like this marriage with Brett Bielema and with what should be a run-first team at Illinois. Shown the ability at Syracuse that even amidst pressure, he's going to take care of the football. Don't think he's going to have to deal with bad O-line play this year like he did at his last stop. Maybe this is surprising to some people. I actually think Tommy DeVito can be effective for Illinois this year, especially, Brett Bielema got bad quarterback play last year. They still got Artur Sitkowski, who might be the worst quarterback in the history of college football. This is the guy that transferred from Rutgers. He was horrible. But they also didn't get a lot out of Brandon Peters last year. I actually think DeVito is a step up over both those guys. I'll put him in the average. I wouldn't be surprised if we look back and say that was a good pickup by Brett Bielema. Boy, Graham Mertz, this is maybe one of the more disappointing guys from last season. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. Graham Mertz, Wisconsin. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt and put him at the end of this average category, but he was a liability to Wisconsin last year. Under 60% completion, X. Under 7 yards per attempt, X. He threw more interceptions than he did touchdowns, X. Mertz just did not take that next step from year 1 to year 2. He obviously came on into the scene in 2020. He had one good game, and people, wanted to crown him king. We saw him struggle at the end of the 2020 season, and that really carried over into last year. That being said, he did have a lot of hype coming in. He's the highest rated high school quarterback recruit that this program has ever gotten. So obviously the ability is there, and that's why I end up putting him in the average category. I'm somewhat hopeful that maybe he takes that next step, but if you're basing this off last season, Graham Mertz was clearly a liability. I mean, with what Wisconsin had defensively, with what they had in Braylon Allen in that run game, no reason that team should have won any less than 10 games, which they did. So very disappointing year for him. With that being said, I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. I'll put him in the average category. He's going to have that luxury again of having a borderline elite running back sharing the backfield with him. New offensive coordinator Bobby Ingram does want to create more splash plays. It'll be interesting to see if they can. Certainly can't put him at anything more than average. I think he's closer to a liability at this point. I'll give him the benefit of the doubt. Graham Mertz, average quarterback going into 2022. 3 more guys here. Tanner Morgan at Minnesota. I got to be honest with you. Maybe it's just me. I think Tanner Morgan's going to have an above average year. It's too hot of a take to put him at anything above that. I'm self-aware enough to know that. But I'll tell you one thing. In 2019, Tanner Morgan completed 66% of his passes, was over 10 yards per attempt. I mean, that is to the level of CJ Stroud, what we saw from Stetson Bennett last year. That is an elite mark. To be over 10 yards per attempt over the full season, that is great. 28 touchdowns to 6 interceptions back in 2019 as well. What changed after that? Why has he regressed the past 2 years? Well, after that season, Kirk Siriaroka, the offensive coordinator, left Minnesota, and we've seen Minnesota's passing game regress each of the past 2 seasons. What's happening this year? Siriaroka is back at Minnesota. I think there's something there. I don't take that 10 yards per attempt mark lightly. I mean, that's elite quarterback play that we saw from Tanner Morgan. We've obviously seen him dip down into that average category, but he's got some things working for him. He's got a great run game. Mohamed Ibrahim is back healthy this year. Saw him get injured in that season opener against Ohio State and missed the whole season. But Minnesota's running game was good even without him. They had plenty of young guys emerge. I think the running game's going to be really, really good once again. He's got Ottman Bell on the outside. And just overall, I really like this Minnesota team under PJ Fleck. They had a lot go wrong for them a year ago as far as injuries, as far as things of that nature, and they still went 9-4. And if you listen to PJ Fleck this offseason, talking about how disappointing that was, I mean, to have all that happen and still go 9-4, very impressive. I think this offense turns a corner this year, starts to mirror kind of what they looked like back in 2019. If you remember, that was the year they went 10-3. It was kind of a renaissance year for Minnesota football. I think Morgan kind of elevates closer. I'm not saying he'll get over 10 yards per attempt again, but clearly something worked with Siriaroka. And now with him back, I do think Morgan improves from what we've seen over the past 2 years. I think he's going to have an above average year. In fact, I just decided this right now. I'm putting him above Casey Thompson. I think that highly of how Minnesota and Tanner Morgan will fare this year. Aidan O'Connell from Purdue. I'm putting him as the second best quarterback in the Big Ten this year. I mean, this guy completed 73.5% of his passes last year. He was over 8 yards per attempt. And listen, I know Jeff Brom's system does somewhat prop up quarterback numbers, but 73.5% is 73.5%. I mean, if it was that high, but it was like 6.2 yards per attempt, then I'd be like, all right, it's over 8. That's good enough. And, one other thing about O'Connell, 23 touchdowns to 8 interceptions. You can certainly win with that. Seemed like Purdue had a 2-quarterback system forever. They finally have been able to center around O'Connell. He's got a full year as the starter. Got this whole offseason. Won't have the luxury of having a guy like David Bell on the outside. That's going to hurt. I still do like the rest of Purdue's receiving core, and they've also got some sneakily good tight ends as well. I think Aidan O'Connell's, from what we saw last year and how I'm projecting that carries over into this year, in Jeff Brom's offense, I think he's going to have a very good year. Probably going to finish with the second best overall numbers in the Big Ten. This Big Ten West race is going to be a doozy this year. I mean, between Purdue, Wisconsin, Minnesota. I mean, this is Iowa. I mean, you can never count Iowa out either. I mean, this is going to be a race to the finish here in the Big Ten West. I think with O'Connell leading this Purdue offense for the second straight year, I mean, with how good he did a year ago, I think the sky's the limit for this offense. And to cap it off, I mean, this shouldn't be surprising. CJ Stroud, got to put him in the Heisman category. I think he will win the Heisman this year. I mean, saw him a year ago. 71% completion, but 9.8 yards per attempt, 38 touchdowns to 5 interceptions. He's going to have so many luxuries once again. He's got one of, if not the best running back in college football. Travion Henderson should have a huge year for the Buckeyes. He's got the best receiver in college football, Jackson Smith and Jigba. And then he's got a lot of young talent on the outside. Marvin Harrison Jr., Fleming. They got some really good options around him. I mean, CJ Stroud should win the Heisman this year. I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory if you ask me. I think one thing that'll be interesting this year, and maybe going, past this year, it's interesting. It'll be interesting to see how the NFL, scouts just how we all, see Bryce Young versus CJ Stroud. If you're asking me, I think Stroud wins the Heisman this year. I think he's the number one quarterback taken off the board in next year's draft. I think translating to the pro level, he's probably the better option over Bryce Young. I mean, Bryce Young is still great. Don't get me wrong. He won the Heisman last year, but I think Stroud's the best quarterback in college football. And I do think he wins the Heisman this year. It's, really kind of as simple as that. This is obviously Ohio State's conference this year. They're minus 250 to win the Big Ten, which you rarely see that on preseason odds. CJ Stroud should have a great year. All right, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. Appreciate it if you made it this far. Obviously, and I said this at the beginning, these rankings do have some nuance to them. Hear what I have to say, and then if you do have any disagreements, feel free to leave any of those in the YouTube comments. I'm happy to talk to y'all about anything. I mentioned this off the top, but with the MLB All-Star break, I feel like this is when football talking season really starts to get heated up. I'm going to try to get the Big 12, Pac-12, and SEC quarterback tier rankings videos done this week and get those all out before we really start to get more into futures, season win totals, and then, thankfully, I can't believe it's been this long, but thankfully we'll start to get into some actual handicapping of some college football games. As a reminder, if you're watching on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe. That really helps out the channel and what I'm trying to build here. Also, if you enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave a like. That also helps as well. You can follow me on Twitter at Fordham Betting. This week, actually, I'm not going to have much except this. It is the MLB All-Star break. We've been, deep in MLB for about 3.5 months. It'll be good to take a few days off, but, certainly on Thursday and Friday, when those games come back, I'll be right back into that grind. And then, I'm going to have tons of sports betting, college football content throughout the preseason and then certainly the regular season as well. So follow me here, subscribe on YouTube, and then follow me on Twitter at Fordham Betting. I'll be back in the next day or two with my Big 12 quarterback tier rankings list. We'll go there. We'll go Pac-12, and then we'll round it out with the SEC. Thank y'all again for tuning in. And yeah, I'll see y'all here in a few days.